The construction industry is forecast to nearly double by 2040. The construction industry is the largest industry in the world, except that 9 out of 10 capital projects are late and over budget. I wrote an article describing why we need to do better on construction projects, with commissioning being one of the solutions and one of the tools we can use for improved project outcomes. I used Google's NotebookLM to summarize the article. Listen to this episode to see how commissioning is a solution to your project success.
You're listening to the Industrial Commissioning Association podcast, where we discuss best practices for industrial plant process and energy system commissioning. Get ready to say no to outdated industry norms and say yes to improved project performance. Here's your host, Paul Turner.
All right, so you sent over some really interesting stuff for this deep dive. It looks like we're going to be talking about construction and the whole growing need for commissioning.
Right.
Now, I got to say that the term commissioning, it doesn't exactly sound like the most thrilling thing in the world. But believe me, this is going to be a fascinating discussion. We're talking about a potential solution to just a mind-blowing amount of waste in construction.
Absolutely. And, it's really all about making sure that these big projects get delivered on time and within budget. And most importantly, that they actually work the way they're supposed to, which is more important now than ever, given just the sheer scale of the projects that we're undertaking to tackle all these global challenges.
Okay, so let's start with that scale then. We've got some excerpts here from episode 26, We Must Do Better, and a McKinsey report that's highlighting some pretty staggering numbers. Global construction spending in 2023 hit $13 trillion.
Wow.
And it's projected to nearly double to $22 trillion by 2040.
Huge.
That's an unbelievable amount of investment.
It is. And, it really underscores how important the construction industry is to the world. It's practically involved in every aspect of trying to address all of these really difficult global issues. Everything from building renewable energy infrastructure to sustainable transportation systems.
But here's the thing. The McKinsey report also says that a shocking 9 out of 10 construction projects are late and over budget.
Yeah.
We're not talking about like a little oopsie here. We're talking about potential cost overruns of 20%, 30%, even 40%, adding years of delays to projects that are supposed to be helping us solve some pretty urgent problems.
Yeah, that's right. And, all of those delays mean a huge financial burden, too. Right now, we're looking at something like $2.6 to $3.9 trillion globally just to cover those cost overruns.
Wow.
And if things don't get more efficient, that number could hit somewhere between $4.4 and $6.6 trillion every year by 2040. So just imagine what we could do if even just some of that wasted money could be redirected to better construction practices.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? Like, what is going wrong here? What leads to these constant overruns and delays? It seems like a systemic problem that really needs fixing.
Well, it is systemic, and that's exactly where commissioning comes into the picture. It's a field that a lot of people don't really know much about, but it's super important for addressing these inefficiencies.
So commissioning, it's more than just, a final inspection before you cut the ribbon, right?
Right.
It's about taking a more proactive approach to a project to make sure that it's successful.
Exactly. Commissioning professionals are involved from the very beginning, from the initial design stages all the way through to when the building or system is up and running and being maintained.
Wow.
Their job is to make sure things don't go wrong in the first place, and that everything's properly integrated and working as it should be.
So they're not just reacting to problems. They're trying to prevent those problems from even happening. That must require a really specific set of skills.
It does. They need to be able to look ahead and anticipate what could go wrong. They need to have a deep understanding of all the different building systems. And they need to be great communicators because they're working with a whole bunch of different people throughout the whole project life cycle.
So basically, they play a crucial role in keeping those massive projects we talked about on track and on budget.
They do. And maybe most importantly, they're thinking long term. They're not just focused on getting the building built, but also on how it's going to operate and perform years down the line, which is crucial for sustainability and efficiency.
Okay, so we've got all these commissioning experts working behind the scenes, but can you give us some real-world examples of how this expertise actually leads to a more efficient and sustainable building?
Sure. Let's say we're building a hospital, okay? That's a pretty complex project with all sorts of specialized systems. You've got HVAC, electrical, medical gas, all kinds of stuff. A commissioning professional would be involved in looking at all those designs from the start, making sure that everything works together seamlessly, and then they'd be on site during the construction process, verifying that equipment is installed correctly and testing all the systems to make sure they're functioning as intended.
So they're catching those little things that could turn into big problems down the road.
Exactly.
Like imagine if the ventilation system in an operating room wasn't calibrated, right? That could have some pretty serious consequences.
Absolutely. And, it's not just about catching mistakes. It's also about making sure things work as well as they can.
Yeah.
For example, they might realize that the building automation system isn't programmed in the most efficient way, which means it's wasting energy. So then they can go and work with the controls contractor to fine-tune everything and reduce the hospital's energy consumption and save money in the long run.
So they're kind of like detectives in the building world.
Uh-huh.
But they're also working to improve the design and operation of the building as they go.
That's right.
What would you say is one of the most important parts of their work?
Well, one thing that people often don't think about is how important documentation is. Commissioning professionals keep really detailed records of every step of the process, from the initial design review all the way to the final performance testing.
So it's like a building's DNA, a complete history of how it was designed, built, and how it works.
Exactly. And that's incredibly valuable for the building owner.
Right. Makes sense.
It helps ensure that the building runs as well as it can for its whole life, which can be decades. And as buildings get smarter and more technologically advanced, that documentation becomes even more crucial.
We've talked about all the great things that commissioning can do, but what about the challenges? What are some of the things that make it harder for these professionals to be as effective as they could be?
Well, I think one of the biggest obstacles is just a lack of awareness. A lot of people involved in construction still don't really get what commissioning is or why it's valuable. They might see it as an extra cost that they don't need rather than an investment that will pay off over time.
It's like preventative health care for buildings, right? You spend a little up front to save yourself a lot of trouble and expense later on.
Exactly. Another challenge is just how fragmented the construction industry is. You've got all these different players: architects, engineers, contractors, subcontractors, suppliers, and they're all working independently with their own goals. So commissioning professionals have to navigate all these different relationships and make sure that everyone's working together towards the same objective.
So they need to be great at communication and diplomacy on top of all the technical expertise.
That's right. They need to be able to explain complicated things, clearly build consensus, and really advocate for what's best for the project. It's a tough job, but it's also really rewarding.
So we've got these highly skilled professionals who are essential to building a better future. But if their role is so important, why isn't commissioning standard practice for every construction project?
Well, there are a few reasons for that.
Yeah.
Cost is definitely a factor. Some developers and building owners just aren't willing to invest in commissioning up front, even though it could save them money in the long term. Then there's the fact that there aren't clear regulations or requirements in a lot of places. Some governments are starting to realize how important commissioning is and are including it in building codes, but it's not happening everywhere yet.
So it's a combination of money, regulations, and just a lack of understanding. But it does sound like things are starting to change.
Oh, absolutely. There's a growing movement within the industry to really embrace commissioning as a best practice. Groups like the International Commissioning Association, or ICA, are developing global standards and certifications to promote professionalism and make sure commissioning services are high quality.
Speaking of the ICA, we mentioned their global commissioning standard earlier. Can you tell us a bit more about what that standard is all about and why it's so important?
Sure. So the ICA Global Commissioning Standard is basically a comprehensive framework that lays out the best practices for commissioning professionals for every single phase of a project. It covers everything from planning and documentation to testing and verification and ongoing monitoring, and it's designed to ensure consistency, quality, and transparency in commissioning services, no matter how big or complex the project is.
So it's like a blueprint for success in commissioning.
Right.
A way to standardize everything and raise the bar for everyone in the field.
Exactly. And by establishing a common language and a set of clear expectations, it helps build trust between everyone involved, from the building owners to the contractors to the commissioning professionals themselves.
So it's a big step forward, moving away from the kind of ad hoc approach that's been common in the past. But standards are only as good as their adoption. So what needs to happen for this IC Global Commissioning Standard to really have an impact globally?
That's a great question. It's going to take a multi-pronged approach. The first thing is we need to raise awareness among everyone involved about the benefits of commissioning and why this global standard is so important. Education is key. We also need to see more governments and regulatory bodies incorporating these standards into building codes and procurement policies.
So it's a team effort between industry organizations, government agencies, and educational institutions to make this happen. And what about the role of technology in all of this? Is technology making the commissioning process easier, or is it adding more layers of complexity?
Technology is definitely changing the landscape of commissioning. On the one hand, is giving us new tools and resources that can streamline things like using BIM to include commissioning data in the design phase, or using drones for inspections, and there's all this new software for analyzing data and creating reports.
So it's like a high-tech toolkit.
Yeah. But of course, technology also brings new challenges. Keeping up with all the latest developments can be tough. And then there's the whole issue of data security and making sure different systems can talk to each other.
Yeah.
But overall, I think technology has the potential to really improve commissioning, make it more effective, more data-driven, and more accessible to a wider range of people.
This has been really eye-opening. We've covered a lot of ground today,
Yeah.
from the basics of what commissioning is to the global impact of this often overlooked field. And it's clear that as we build a more complex and technologically advanced future, the role of commissioning professionals is only going to become more crucial.
I agree. They're the unsung heroes of the built environment, working behind the scenes to make sure our buildings and infrastructure are not just functional, but also safe, efficient, and sustainable.
Well said. And for you, our listener, we want you to think about this conversation the next time you walk into a building. Think about all those intricate systems behind the walls and the meticulous planning and testing that went into making it all work. And maybe consider how your own expertise and ideas could contribute to a better, more sustainable future. We'll talk more about that connection after a quick break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. So we're in the home stretch of our deep dive into commissioning and how it's shaping the future of construction. We've talked about the challenges, the growing demand for this expertise, and those global standards from the ICA that are trying to make things more consistent across the board. Now let's shift gears a bit and think about what this all means for you and how it connects to your own work.
What's really interesting is that as buildings are becoming smarter, more interconnected, the commissioning process becomes less about the physical stuff and more about making sure all these complex systems play nicely together. Think about things like integrating renewable energy sources, smart grids, building automation systems that respond to what people in the building need. It's a whole new level of complexity.
It's almost like buildings are becoming living organisms with all these interconnected systems that need to be carefully managed.
Yeah, exactly.
And someone needs to understand the big picture to make sure everything's running smoothly and efficiently. That's a huge responsibility.
It really is. And the stakes are only getting higher, especially when we think about how urgent it is to tackle climate change and create a more sustainable world.
Yeah.
If we're going to meet those challenges, commissioning has to be a top priority.
Okay, so let's bring this back to our listener. You sent us this material for a reason. What kind of work do you do that might intersect with all of this?
That's the key question, right? Maybe you're an architect who designs energy-efficient buildings. Or maybe you're an engineer developing new sustainable technologies. Or perhaps you're in urban planning, working on those massive city-scale infrastructure projects. Or maybe you're on the investment side deciding where to put resources to have the biggest impact.
Right.
No matter what your specific area is, understanding the core ideas behind commissioning can help you make smarter decisions and contribute to a more efficient and sustainable future.
So it's not just about being a commissioning expert yourself. It's about understanding the principles and making sure they're part of your own work.
Exactly.
So like if you're designing a building, you'd think about how it will be commissioned right from the start.
Right.
And if you're looking at an investment opportunity, you'd want to know if they're following commissioning best practices.
Precisely. It's all about weaving in those principles of efficiency, performance, and long-term thinking into everything, from design and construction to how the building's operated and maintained.
One thing that stood out to me as we were going through all this material is that commissioning often feels like it's reacting to problems after they've already happened.
Yeah.
But it sounds like we need to move towards a more proactive approach, anticipating problems before they pop up and designing them out of the system from the get-go. Are you seeing that kind of shift in the industry?
Absolutely. There's definitely a growing focus on what we call CX, which stands for commissioning and qualification. And it's about involving commissioning experts early on in the design phase to spot potential risks and make sure systems are designed to work their best right from the start.
So it's like a pre-flight check for a building, making sure everything's in tip-top shape before it even leaves the ground.
That's a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And it's not just about avoiding problems. It's also about squeezing out every last bit of performance. For example, they might use computer simulations to test different design options and figure out which one's the most energy efficient. Or they might work with the contractor to come up with a super detailed testing plan to make sure the building hits all its performance goals.
So it's a team effort that brings in everyone from the architect to the engineer to the contractor. Everyone's on the same page working towards the same goals.
Exactly.
And it seems like that collaboration doesn't end once the project's done. We talked before about how important documentation is, keeping those records that can be used for operation and maintenance down the line.
Absolutely. The commissioning process keeps going even after people move into the building. It's about creating a system where you're constantly monitoring things and looking for ways to improve. You might use sensors to track energy use or do regular inspections to catch problems early on. Or you might train the people who operate the building on how to keep everything running efficiently.
So it's about building a culture of efficiency and performance that lasts for the entire life of the building.
Right.
And it sounds like that long-term thinking is only going to get more and more important as we deal with climate change and dwindling resources.
It's crucial. We can't keep doing things the same way we always have. We have to get smarter about how we build and operate our buildings and be mindful of the impact they have on the planet and the people who come after us.
So if you had one message for our listener, what would it be? What's the most important thing you want them to take away from this deep dive into commissioning?
Commissioning isn't just some technical process. It's a way of thinking. It's a commitment to quality performance and planning for the long haul. And it's something that everyone involved in the built environment can contribute to.
That's a great point. It's about taking responsibility, asking the hard questions, and pushing for better answers. Whether you're designing a building, managing a construction project, or just working in an office, you have a role to play in making our buildings more efficient and sustainable.
Exactly. We all have a stake in creating a world where our buildings and infrastructure meet our needs today without messing things up for future generations.
That's a perfect note to end on, I think. We've explored the ins and outs of commissioning, the challenges and the possibilities, and how it fits into the big picture of creating a more sustainable future. It's a field that often flies under the radar, but it's absolutely vital to making the buildings and infrastructure that we all rely on. We hope this deep dive has given you a new perspective on the important work that commissioning professionals do, and maybe even inspired you to think about how you can bring some of those same principles into your own world. Thanks for joining us on this exploration, and as always, keep diving deeper.
Thanks for listening. To become a member of the Industrial Commissioning Association, visit icxa.net. Members get access to commissioning standards, procurement specifications, commissioning training and certification, plus many more specialized resources to help you with commissioning of your industrial plant process and energy systems. Visit icxa.net for more information.